Good afternoon. Welcome back from lunch. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. I'm Jonathan Fleck. This is my colleague, Cristina Giliberti.
Hello.
We're going to be continuing today's workshop, so the third workshop. This one is going to be on using the same authentic material to teach different linguistic topics and design different class activities. And it'll flow really well from the previous workshops where we identified what authentic data we can use and brainstorm some ways to use it. So now we'll get into some preparations for your own hands-on activities. I teach Portuguese and Spanish here at Rice. I'll be giving an example from our Portuguese curriculum where we use one data source from Brazilian Portuguese to teach two different linguistic aspects. And then Cristina will follow up with an example from the Italian curriculum. And then we'll get as soon as possible to your hands-on activities because we really want to see what you guys can produce based on what you've been learning. Okay, so let's start with the Brazilian Portuguese sequence. Here we're going to be using an audio clip to practice two different linguistic topics. We're going to be using vocabulary, the vocabulary of careers, and we're also going to learn two important pronunciation patterns that the students will really need. The data that we're going to use today, that I used for this activity, comes from a linguistics corpus, so a data bank of Brazilian Portuguese speech that was created for the purposes of linguistic studies, not necessarily for teaching, but we adapted it for the purposes of teaching. It's really important to note that the students have already studied careers vocabulary prior to this lesson, but they have not studied the pronunciation patterns. Of course, they've heard the pronunciation patterns because they come up quite frequently, but they haven't studied them formally. In other words, we're using the same audio to go from to practice previous knowledge to expand their vocabulary that they've already studied, and then transitioning to new knowledge. So we're doing both previous and new knowledge with the same data. And just another way of saying that is that we have, say, 4 linguistic skills or linguistic topics, and for this presentation, for the Portuguese example, we've chosen vocabulary and pronunciation, so 2 out of the 4 that are generally seen. In the Italian data that we're going to hear later, the other 2 parts of it are filled in, along with some extra stuff too. And as I stated earlier, the vocabulary is prior knowledge, which allows them to then get into the new knowledge of the pronunciation. So now I'll go over some of the activity sequence that we use with this data. So the first activity is kind of a pre-activity, and this is before they hear the recording. And here's the text of the student instructions. Of course, it's in Portuguese in the actual curriculum, but here it's been translated. They're going to be making predictions about what they expect, what type of vocabulary, what fields of vocabulary they're going to expect to hear in the audio, in the recording. And this is based on their knowledge from the previous vocabulary lessons that they've been hearing, as well as their own background knowledge, what they know about the workforce, their own logic to dictate what they're going to predict. And they're going to be asked to fill in a diagram here, kind of an association diagram where it says professional training and professional background, and write a series of words that they relate, that they associate with that topic. The important thing here is that this is a pre-activity where the students are activating their prior knowledge. They already know these things, and they're using them to prepare themselves to enter into this difficult audio. And that's really helpful because, as we know, as we've heard in previous discussions, and also as you've experienced in your own teaching, using authentic audio sounds really great, but it's often very difficult for the students because the speakers don't really slow down. They're speaking to a native audience as well, and they might use forms that aren't standard, as we talked about in our discussion section over there. And so starting with this pre-activity where they get to activate their own knowledge that they already have lessens the degree of difficulty or the fear factor, the sticker shock that might go into using these kinds of audios. So then they're going to compare their predictions with their partner, and then finally listen to the audio, which is a way to confirm their predictions, to test out what they thought. And they're going to see which words they recognize from what they predicted versus which words that are actually in the audio are surprising to them. And in this way, they get to make a personal connection to the actual conversation or the audio file that we're hearing because they've thought about it critically. They made predictions, they've compared their predictions, and they've confirmed them or denied them. As the activity continues, they're going to move from the vocabulary section to the pronunciation section now that they've become accustomed to the audio, that they've done, I don't want to say the easy part, but the part that flows more naturally from their previous work in the unit to the new part, which is actually going to be more of a challenge. The audio can be played a few times if necessary, and then they're going to be given the transcription with certain words enhanced. By enhanced, I mean that certain words are going to be in red and certain words in blue. Here's just a small section of the transcription of what is going to be in the audio. It's the person talking about his professional background. And as you can see, certain words, 2 of the words here are in blue, and 5 of the words there are in red, and those words are going to exhibit the patterns that we're hoping they'll notice. So the students then have to individually formulate the pattern. They have to describe what's going on. And in this way, the instructor is not telling them this is the pattern that you need to follow. The students have to discover it for themselves. They have to notice the data, observe it, and come up with a formulation themselves, which means they have the responsibility for coming up with the pattern, which is really what we want when we have a student-centered classroom. They have the responsibility for furthering their own knowledge. The instructor is there to guide them, to kind of point them where to look with the enhanced data by putting the words in different colors. But when they know where to look, they are responsible for gathering the information. And then these students are going to confirm or refine their pattern by speaking with a partner and by going over other words that they know and see if the pattern that they've described fits with the other words. I know this is going to be a little bit abstract since I'm not actually using the pattern in this presentation, but I think this kind of thing can be generalized to a lot of people's curriculum, which is exactly what you're going to practice after this presentation. Okay, so just to recap, the takeaways, the key concepts that went into creating this activity, in which we hope you'll incorporate in your hands-on activities later, is that it's really good for them to activate their prior knowledge using an activity before they hear the recording or at the beginning of the sequence. And as instructors, it's important to let the students take control. So they're making, comparing, and testing their predictions, and that happened both in the audio section and in the vocabulary section, as well as in the pronunciation. And again, another way to say that is they have the responsibility. They have the power. They're directing their own rules. They're not reading a rule and then applying it from the textbook. Okay. So just again to recap, we used one audio, this person talking about his professional background, his training, to cover 2 different linguistic skills or linguistic topics. Now I'm going to pass the word to my colleague, Dr. Giliberti, who's going to be using Italian data, and is going to be focusing especially on this last one, the conversation skills, which is something that's not always formally treated in a textbook as such. And so it's really good that she was able to use this authentic data in order to flesh that out, which is exactly what her presentation is going to be. Another difference between our 2 presentations is that my data was taken from a linguistics corpus, whereas Dr. Giliberti's data wasn't already existing, and she had collected it in a very interesting way, which she will explain to you.
Buon pomeriggio, I'm Cristina Giliberti, and follow basically what Jonathan has told us a few minutes ago. I mean, I'm used the same data with multiple reasons. I was able to find in the same data different elements to teach different things. Now, I also follows what was done this morning by my colleague Luziris and Aymara, because my story starts when I realized that I was using this unit from my textbook about vacation time and hotel, and I realized that there was something missing. For example, how to make a reservation. Now we have computer, right? But reservation can be made also over the phone. So I needed that data. Now, I wanted to open a parenthesis. We're talking about authentic data, collecting data, but for some languages like Italian, it's very difficult because we don't have corpora that we can use. And so, and even on YouTube, everything is more like based on an interview when we're looking for interaction. And it has been always very difficult to find that, to have this incredible material to use as a base for my teaching. So I had to be creative. And one way was carrying with me a tape recorder and bothering my friends and my family, asking them if I could record, this authentic conversation. Well, I end up having a good amount of material to use. I don't have a social life anymore because obviously they don't invite me to events, and actually if there's any party going on, you have my email address. But to be even more creative, for this particular unit, since I needed a phone or any form of making reservation, I called an hotel in Italy and I recorded the conversation. Jonathan, help out here. See, Italy is going to take a while because it's...
Hotel Cortina, buongiorno.
Salve, buongiorno. Vorrei fare una prenotazione.
Sì, mi dica.
Allora, vorrei prenotare per la settimana del 12 dicembre, quindi dal 12 dicembre.
Okay, so we don't need to listen to the whole thing. Actually, that was my voice and the receptionist. The frustration part of this recording that I had to cancel the reservation, so I didn't go to Cortina, which is this beautiful place on the Alps. So it was just a fake thing. But I ended up with this beautiful material, which was interaction. So what I did, as soon as I had it, I did the transcription. Reading the transcription for me was like more an epiphanic moment because I found so many components that I could teach by themselves, or as the initial purpose was to supply what I didn't have from my book. So I was able to find new terms to expand the knowledge that the students had already from the book. I was able to find expressions of time which were new, for example, how to express the span of time from to. I could introduce the months of the year or review them if I'd done already. That means the same data that I had collected could have been used also for, because I used them for 142, which is the second semester Italian, but could be used also for 141. So such an advanced interaction could have been used also for a very beginner level. I was dealing with an interaction. The interaction is a source of an incredible amount of information that are so useful, because it suggests us all the strategies through which a conversation happens. And these strategies are personal choices, but they have such a strong sociolinguistic component that it's one we want to focus on, what we have been focusing here at CLIC. Let's go back to my personal story. This data gave me most of all the opportunity to introduce my students to a new way to asking permission by using expressions that I had used already, but in a different context. So they were using the conditional form of verb volere. We all speak Italian, so you know which one is it, right? Which is vorrei. And they've been using vorrei to communicate a desire and also to make a request in a bar or in a restaurant. And so I had to reinforce this previous knowledge that I had. So it was very easy for me just to ask simple question, or I asked them also to improvise some role play, having one, acting as a bartender or and another one as a customer. And so this was a way to reinforce, right, what they had already. But now I had to kind of redirect their attentions on the purpose of my class. That was using vorrei, this time, to ask for permission. And I want to recreate the same context that they have touched with their own hands, which was in the recording, which was the hotel reservation. So one thing that I've found that is very useful is the cross-cultural analysis. So using what they know in their own native language and try to find out the same things in L2. So they need to be aware what they do in their own language first, right? When, in this case, when they make an hotel reservation, and then it was possible, once they are aware of what they do, what technique or strategies they're using to communicate, it would have been easier for him to find what techniques and strategies Italians use. So I asked them, as a first step, to write down a short opening of a formal conversation when two students were acting, one as a client, the other one as a receptionist. Then they wrote down, obviously, the dialogue, and then they had to analyze what expressions they were using when they were asking permission to make an hotel reservation. So what is the English permission to make an hotel reservation? It's basically, could I, may I, right? So the students, not all of them, but some of them use those particular expressions. And I asked them to see, going to the Italian version, to the Italian transcript, to see what the lady, me, they didn't know it was me, so some of them realized, Professor, I think it's you. And obviously I said no. And they were supposed to find out what this lady was saying, right? At that point, they realized, well, they're using vorrei. So vorrei has this other function according to the context that it's used. So they were learning pragmatics, but they didn't know they were learning pragmatics. So it was important that they recognize the rule and they were able to understand this new function. And now I had to see if they actually understood what they were doing. So I gave them different sentences. In each of them, vorrei, it's used with the different functions. Functions that they knew already, to express desire or to make a request, and functions that they were new, like to ask for permission. They did it. So they were able to, it was an easy task, but I had to make things more difficult for them, obviously. And this time, I bothered my husband.
Buongiorno, Hotel Viareggio, sono Francesco. Certo, mi dica, che periodo?
I cannot turn it off. Aiuto.
Benissimo, un attimo.
Okay, so what did my husband, what did he do? What do you think he did? Exactly, he was the receptionist and the students had to answer. And by answering, they had to record their own answers altogether. So we had this, opening of a conversation, which was very interesting. It was a disaster, but they did it, right? I mean, and they made many other mistakes, but they used vorrei correctly. So, and that was at least, they did what they were supposed to do. So, same data, different topics that can be taught, and transcribe them. Whatever you collect, whatever you have, transcription really enlightens your mind. You see things, and then really it happened to me. I came here, didn't know anything about anything, and so, but that really gave me the chance to see that works. I mean, yes, I see how can I expand terminology that they know already. And yes, the grammar also. And then, again, it's very important, interaction offers you the strategy of the communication. Please don't forget that. That is very important. So, suggestion for your work on your handout. Reinforce the knowledge that the students have already with whatever technique or whatever activity you like. Force the student to make the prediction, right? Try to give them the habit of making predictions. And don't forget to stress, to make them aware of what they do in their own language. have the students find out the rule of the language you are teaching. For further information, if you want to go to our website, we have some examples of lessons in Portuguese and lessons in Italian. And thank you so much. So you can put your hand on your handout and let's see what you do. Thank you.